thank you all for coming. Teina is now aware of the offer that has been made by the Minister and her position. Teina is very pleased to have his innocence finally formally acknowledged, and he's also extremely grateful to receive the apology from the Minister on behalf of the Crown. That was a significant matter for him, and he was very moved when the apology was read to him. We learnt of the Minister's position approximately 24 hours ago, so that's how long Teina's known. He's aware of the offer of compensation, and it is just that. It is an offer of compensation for Teina to accept or not. Now the reality is there's very little that can be done if the amount isn't accepted, but I'm sure you'll appreciate that for anyone in this situation, it's a significant moment and something that can't be rushed into, particularly for Teina in his circumstances, which have been well documented. He needs time to reflect on the offer, and that's what we're asking for now. He's going to take time to think about it. He's going to take further advice from us, and in due course he'll be in a position to accept or otherwise the offer of compensation. As you'll be aware, the offer is approximately $2.5 million. Of that, approximately $2.2 million is for Teina's non-pecuniary losses. That's his loss of liberty for the 22 years of his wrongful imprisonment, the loss of his relationship with his family, the ability to marry, to spend his 20s like the rest of us have been fortunate enough to do, and indeed his 30s. The remaining approximate $300,000 is for Teina's pecuniary losses. That is his actual fiscal loss, which includes a component of loss of income for his 22 years of wrongful imprisonment, a contribution with respect to a loss of future earnings, as well as all of the costs incurred by him in the application for compensation.
Concerning the offer itself, it would be perhaps obvious that as Council we are disappointed with the quantum. You will have seen from the material which I know has been distributed by the Ministry that we sought a considerable amount more than has been offered, and so it's natural that we will feel some sense of disappointment, and I want to make it clear that's our feeling as Teina's legal team and support team, and I'm not intending to convey or not convey any particular feeling from Teina. We have immense respect for Justice Hanson and the way he analysed the claim for compensation in the two reports he's prepared. His first report, which we've had since March, is extremely thorough and very clear. You will note, I think, from the final paragraph that not only did he find, as he was asked to consider, whether Teina has proved his innocence on the balance of probabilities, he also concluded that he felt that he'd proved his innocence to an even higher standard, and I take that to mean that he'd proved his innocence beyond reasonable doubt. That certainly seems to have been accepted quite clearly by the Minister and by Cabinet. Of course, in the end of the day, the decision as to how much he is to be compensated is one for Cabinet. It is really an exercise, I suppose, of an element of the royal prerogative. It's the Queen's money, it's the government's money, it's an ex gratia payment, meaning that it's given out of the goodness of the heart rather than through any strict legal obligation. Others have found in the past that there is no actual appeal right from ex gratia payments such as these. You cannot judicially review a prerogative payment, a payment for compensation such as this. So that's the position we find ourselves in. We'll have another look at that, and we'll talk to Teina about that and consider what, if anything, can be done. One area where we have some concern, and I raised this with the Minister directly, is you will see from Justice Hanson's second report, the one as to quantum, that His Honour recommended that Cabinet consider making an allowance for consumer price index increases, and that's because the amount of $100,000 per annum which has been talked about quite a lot over the last 24 hours since somehow this information was partially leaked. That's been in place for approximately 16 years, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out the spending power of $100,000 today is much less than $100,000 in the year 2001. It seems Cabinet accepted what Justice Hanson said in the sense that they did consider it, but they rejected that. I personally felt that the indication from Justice Hanson was that the Cabinet should pay some form of consumer price index increase, and it's that area, as I say, which disappoints us more than any other area. As to the actual amount, of course it is a substantial amount of money. It's more money than most people in New Zealand will ever have to their name, certainly in black ink. And so, one can't be ingracious about the award and the offer of compensation. But by the same token, one can't lose sight of the fact that this man suffered 22 years in incarceration in one form or another for crimes which he did not commit. And when one looks at other compensatory awards in similar circumstances, and referring of course to Mr Thomas and Mr Doherty, the sums of money which they received, if extrapolated out to the length of time Teina spent in custody and then factored for consumer price index increases, would be significantly more than Teina has been offered by Cabinet. And so that's another area where we look at it and we think, well, there is a factor of disappointment here. There are other cases which have been made under the current guidelines, under the current compensatory Cabinet guidelines, which have resulted in higher awards than indeed Mr Pora would receive on an annualised basis. And that too is a disparity issue which for us is disappointing. However, the offer is made, as Ingrid has said. It is an offer, it's not a negotiation process. Really, Mr Pora's options are to accept it or to reject it. And we need to, as Ingrid said, spend some time talking that process through with him, and that's what we will do. It won't be a long time, but it will be a number of days before we're in a position to advise publicly whether there is any further news in this regard. And I think that completes all the matters that we wish to address, and we're happy to take any questions.
Jonathan, what was Teina's reaction to that offer of compensation at number 2.5?
As Ingrid said, he was deeply moved by the apology which you will have seen, and I asked the Minister to read it out publicly, and she agreed that she would do so. I don't know whether she did, I assume she has. Was certainly, to my impression, a very personal one, and it was a deeply felt one. Teina certainly felt it, and his reaction was an emotional one. As to the money amount, he was quite neutral. Money is an unfamiliar concept to him. When he was incarcerated at the age of 17, he had very little. He spent until his nearly his 39th birthday in prison, and so since he's been out, he hasn't had a lot of money. So these are telephone book numbers, and so his reaction, I wouldn't say it's bewilderment, but it wasn't the sort of reaction that people who are more familiar with these sorts of money might have had.
He was quite overwhelmed. It's an overwhelming figure or number for anyone, but particularly for someone in Teina's position. And as we said, he needs an opportunity now to reflect on it, and we need an opportunity to further discuss with him what that money looks like in real terms, and that's a process that is going to take some time for Teina. He has some ideas of what he'd like to do with the money, and we've had discussions about that for some time in the event that he was successful in his application for compensation. But the reality is, as I say, it's a mind-boggling figure, very difficult to comprehend for anyone, and particularly for Teina, who, until the news was broken to him yesterday, really had no idea what the figure might look like. The decision of Justice Hanson from March was embargoed. We weren't allowed to discuss that with Teina or anyone, so we couldn't have the full discussions as to quantum that might have prepared him a little bit better for the number of zeros that might be coming his way, and obviously that's something that we need to do further now.
When did you find out that this was going to be announced today? Was it just
Well,
recently?
that's for us, really. But yes, certainly very recently.
How do you put a dollar figure on that, Jonathan? How do you put a dollar figure on losing the best years of your life with New Zealand's worst players? Can you?
Well, that's not something, Edward, they teach you in law school, unfortunately. I mean, it's a sociology question, really, rather than a legal question. What you can do is look at what other people have been awarded in similar circumstances. One of the bases of our law is parity between people, and that's why it seemed to us when we made our submissions as to quantum that looking at other cases where people had been wrongly imprisoned, we could get some sense of the likely sums and how other cases have been viewed. I mean, we don't say that Mr. Pora's case was worse than Mr. Thomas's. It wasn't. There's no suggestion that police in this case set about planting evidence, as it seems has been accepted happened in Mr. Thomas's case. So there was an element of aggravation there. So we didn't think it was that much, but it was probably more serious than other cases given Mr. Pora's, given Teina's brain-based disability. So that's how you do it, I suppose, look at other factors. But these guidelines seem to have assumed far greater focus than we had expected.
And just on the Thomas case, I mean, he spent 9 years in prison, and when you sort of put that into today's money, it's a bit over $4 million.
But that's only
That's the cold hard numbers.
that's only the number of years. When you multiply that out for Teina to 22 years, you end up with a figure which would be over $10 million. So that was more than we had claimed, certainly more than we could have reasonably expected.
Was there what was the figure that you had looked at? What would be a figure that you wouldn't be disappointed with?
Well, it's really hard to say. And as Edward's just said, you know, how do you put a figure on these things? I think we had to say, well, we don't know. We looked at other cases, we did some arithmetic, we did some comparisons, and we had a range. We naturally sought the most we thought we could reasonably seek, and you will see from the papers that the amount that we had suggested could be appropriate, and the upper limit was about the $8 million mark. So we were well off the mark, it seems.
Why do you think the amount that was offered by the Minister and Cabinet was so much lower than what you had gone for and what the review even suggested?
So Justice Henson asked for submissions from us and the Crown, and as Jonathan said, the amount that we believe Teina is entitled to and ought to have received is at the higher end of the scale, and as will be seen from the submissions, the amount the Crown sought was slightly lower than that's been granted. So Justice Henson had to take into consideration the submissions that we made and the basis for those mathematical calculations in reaching his recommendation. If the recommendation or invitation to adopt CPI had been accepted, obviously that figure would have increased fairly significantly.
Would have been closer, would have been over 4 million, I think. And I don't think we'd be standing here saying we were disappointed, personally disappointed, if that had been the figure.
Ingrid, you mentioned that you'd had some discussions with Teina about what he might do with the money if there was some to come his way. What were some of the things that came up?
The primary thing that Teina has instructed us to do and authorised us to talk about today is to put the funds into a whānau trust for him, his daughter and his grandson. And that is where the majority of funds will go if the offer is accepted and if the funds are paid. And that, of course, means, and it's significant, that Teina will not have direct control over those finances. When the application for compensation was first filed in April of last year, as a legal team, we considered the impact of a large sum of money being placed in Teina's bank account with no control or support. We're very pleased that he heeded our advice and allowed us to establish that. That's not to say that if this goes through and if the offer's accepted, he won't have some spending money, because that's important to him. And he does have some large goals about purchasing an outrageously expensive motor vehicle, travelling, I think it's been mentioned earlier today, travelling to America to meet a pastor whom he places significant importance on in turning his life around in prison, and a few other things. He has some goals to help others, And perhaps I should have started with that, because that's probably the most significant thing in Teina's mind. He wants to reach out to others and offer some assistance. There's nothing concrete in force now. Obviously, we didn't know until recently there would even be an offer, but that's very, very important to Teina.
What sort of car does he want?
We'll have to wait and see.
It's not a Toyota Corolla.
Can I just make one other comment just before we continue with questions that I sort of mentioned earlier? For us, this is very much the end of the road once this last chapter has been completed. It's been an amazing journey. It's been a great honour and a privilege to help Teina from the condition that he was in to the condition that he has now reached with these sort of decisions in front of him that he must never have dreamed of. The person that was pivotal in all of this, that started the ball rolling, is Tim McKinnell. And Tim should be standing here today answering these questions alongside us. Sadly, he would have been, but for the fact that his flight between Santiago and Auckland last night was turned back 3 or 4 hours into it, so he had an extra stopover in Santiago, and right now he's somewhere over the Southern Ocean. He'll arrive back in New Zealand tonight about 9 o'clock, so that's disappointing for him. It's very disappointing for us, and I just want to acknowledge now the central and pivotal role that he's played in all of this. Anyway, any more questions?
Thank you. Just, maybe to reiterate, can you explain exactly how important the apology was to Teina?
I'm not going to categorise or put in order the importance, but at the moment that has been the most significant part of the package offered by and put by the Minister. We have a man who, notwithstanding his actions when he was a 17-year-old, has known for his whole life that he didn't do what he spent nearly 22 years in jail for. So to have a formal acknowledgement of that innocence and to have apology, a genuine apology, which is how he accepts and interprets it, for what he has gone through, is hugely significant to Teina.
Was he emotional when he received that apology?
Yes.